everybody. My name is Andrea. I am a music director and arranger. I also orchestrate and compose and teach voice, and I'm an educator. So, all those multi-hyphenate things that often people here encounter. The things I have done that you are most likely to have known about were the bands Visit and Tootsie. Right now I'm working on a new musical with Shayna Taub called Suffs, which is premiering at the Public in the spring. So that's my major project right now. And I also have a show of my own that, fun fact, Meg, who is on this call, also worked on. That's getting a new production in the spring. So these days I'm spending a little bit more time writing than usual, which is very exciting.
Hi everyone, I'm Connor. I am an orchestrator arranger primarily. I'm also a music director, music supervisor, guitarist around town. I've been doing this for 5 years full time now. Things you may have known that I've worked on were A Bronx Tale on Broadway. I did the Merrily We Roll Along revival with Meg. I worked on the Estella Scrooge film that just came out this past year in quarantine, if anyone saw that. I'm about to head out to Tokyo for 3 months to work on a new stage version of Spirited Away.
Hi everybody, so good to see some friends on here. My name is Meg Zervoulis. I primarily am a music director and educator. I also do a lot of work with Maestra, which is an organization that works to uplift women and non-binary people in the musical theater industry. Similar to Andrea, the ones that you would recognize the most are Mean Girls, The Prom, the most recent West Side Story revival, which could be its entire own Zoom roundtable. And my current project is The Visitor, which is opening. It has just opened down at the Public Theater. That's a musical by Tom Kitt and others. And my real life project is that I am the mother of a 4-week-old baby. So I am exhausted and will definitely disappear probably around 8 o'clock from video, just to make sure that she can keep on trucking. Thank you for having us, Holly.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Lowrey, and my connection to this group is I am the producing director for MusicalWriters.com. We just finished our 3rd new musical reading. I am normally based in Dallas, Fort Worth. That's where I've lived my entire life. But with COVID last year, I actually moved to my farm in Arkansas, and I've been splitting my time away from here between Dallas and New York City. So all of my musicals and productions have been Dallas-Fort Worth based. And my passion is new musicals and getting new scripts out there, new ideas and new voices. And so that maybe we don't have to all listen to more productions of Mamma Mia and Sound of Music for the rest of our lives. So that's my passion. And I'm really excited to work with all of the musical writers out there, wherever they are in their progress.
Okay, so how did you decide you wanted to be a music director? Like what kind of started that for you? Did you come out of a performance background, a writing background? Somebody jump in, and how did you get started in that?
Yeah, I've been playing the piano since I was 5 years old. And my mom will tell you the story of when I was in 3rd grade. I was at a church music camp, and I was very, very frustrated because everybody was supposed to be singing an E flat and they were singing an E, and the director wasn't changing it. And I was incredibly upset about it. And she said that, and I quote, "I can't wait until I'm in charge." And I think that was the beginning of my musical director experience. But I think for me, as a pianist first and a vocalist 7th on the list, I like the collaboration of it. I'm not really interested in just playing the piano by myself in a room. So when I realized that that was kind of the best way to make music was to do the collaborative piano. And then when you get to tell a story with it as well, that's how I got into musical direction.
I've always been a storyteller through music. I've been singing my whole life. I've been playing piano since I was 5. I've been composing for a very long time. And I think many of us at some point performed, and I did it when I was younger. And I started college wanting to be a film composer. And I discovered that it's a pretty solitary job, and that's not the part that I enjoy. So I decided to pursue music directing professionally when I was in college. And looking back, I realized that all of the activities I had done leading up to that point were really setting me up for this sort of work. Leading my choir and arranging for the choir and working on the jazz show and things like that. So once it started, it seemed inevitable, but it didn't become a plan until I was about 19 years old.
Yeah, very similar to Andrea for me. I was a musical theater opera performer up through college. When I got there, I was already kind of a small fish in a small pond. So I was looking around trying to figure out, so what can I do where I can actually get a job? And I had played guitar and kind of messed around on piano for a while. So I just slowly started doing that. And by the time I finished college, I figured that was the thing that I was going to do for my career instead of performing.
And as for me, I started piano super young. My dad is a musician, so we had a piano in the house. He's also a guitarist. So I started playing by ear at a young age, then continued piano lessons and was in more of the classical side. So, you know, playing concertos, nerding out over music theory in elementary school. But then my choir teacher in high school went on a maternity leave that ended up being longer than expected, and they didn't find someone to replace her. So that year, as a student, I started accompanying the choir, and then that led to doing the musicals, et cetera, et cetera. And then, long story short, I live right near Paper Mill Playhouse in New Jersey and started working there in high school. And then one thing just kind of led to another, and I just continued music directing from about age, I'd say 15 until now.
So talk to us about what the role of a music director is.
Part of it actually ends up ultimately, at least for Broadway, being very unmusical. So there's a lot of diplomacy that we end up having to do. We, you know, although we're showing up to the show at night, that's from 8 to 10:30. That is the musical portion. A lot of what we're handling in the day involves coordinating rehearsal schedules. With a new musical, it's a lot about preparing for the Tonys, preparing for TV appearances, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that ends up being logistical and many hours on your email. But of course, our favorite part is in the evening or afternoon for matinee when we get to do the show. So that's just a kind of a zoom out of music direction as a whole for Broadway.
Yeah, and if you're working on a new show, that's sort of the end of the process as well. If you come in very early, it's often the writer, the director, a stage manager, and the music director, and that's the whole team at the beginning. So you're teaching the actors the music and you're playing the parts, and then as it grows, the admin side of it grows and your work grows and you start to perhaps overlap with other music team members, or your list of jobs grows, which I think we're going to talk about more later, the many different sides of a music department. But generally, as a show blossoms, it begins where there's a one-person music department. It becomes a multi-person, a village of work. And I also think it's important to note that that's at the professional new musical development level. And if you're working at a smaller theater, often you as the music director are doing something that would be split among many people. So you're teaching the music, you are conducting the orchestra, you are hiring the musicians, you are programming the keyboards, you are playing auditions. There are many elements depending on the level of theater that you're working at that a music director can get involved with.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. The smaller your footprint is, whether you're community or regional, music director really does everything. And I would say that the music director, other than the stage manager in a community or regional production, is really the only other person who is a part of the project from day one all the way until the end, starting with auditions, a lot of times playing for auditions, helping with the casting choices for the show, teaching all of the vocal parts, hiring the orchestra, working with the director and the stage manager to schedule those rehearsals and figure out who's singing what part and who's on stage when the other people are in costume changes. And then finally, you get to opening night and you get to perform the show, either directing from the piano or stick conducting as well. So music director holds quite the keys to the whole show from beginning to end, especially if you're in a smaller community theater, regional theater, where you don't have a whole team of folks who are helping with all of the other pieces and parts.
There's also some philosophical differences about how involved they are in the creative side of it. When Meg and I did the Merrily revival, the music supervisor, Alex Gemignani, is an actor. And so he was very in it with the directors and talking about dramatic intention and really trying to tailor every musical moment to every bit of drama that there was. Stephen Sondheim is alive, but we were sort of acting as if it was this work that we could interpret really. Versus there are other music directors that whatever the composer gives them, that is sort of their mission. They do whatever they can to make that sound as good. And they really don't get in it with the director or the producers or the composer or whoever. So there is a varying level of how much you can or will be involved with the creative process.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I would agree with that. I think just something as simple, especially in productions where you are doing a standard script of Sound of Music or Music Man, sometimes just things as simple as figuring out, okay, we've got to double this play off because the scene change or the costume change is going to take longer, or we're going to make this a more darker, serious scene versus a happy, uplifting scene based on the creative direction from the director. And then also, I think working with a choreographer is a huge thing that I find, especially if all they've ever listened to is the cast album and they don't know what all the dance breaks sound like and how long they are. And I think that having that communication with the choreographer is huge, and more of a partnership than maybe in the larger scheme of things.
What's the difference in a music director, a music supervisor, an arranger, an orchestrator? Educate us on those different roles within the music department of a show.
I'm going to quote the brilliant David Chase, an incredible dance arranger and music supervisor, who describes it as such. He says, a composer says, I imagine a tree. And depending on the composer, either that's it, or they say, I imagine a birch tree on a hill at dusk and there's a farmhouse in the distance. The ones who just say, I imagine a tree, are someone who sings a melody into a recording device and says, hey, arranger, make this a thing. And then the more thorough people are the people that we all tend to think of as the classic composers who hand you a piano vocal score with a lot of very specific intentions. The arranger sketches the tree. So the arranger is filling in what's happening at every moment. So it's not just we're singing here, what's the harmony, what are the notes, what are the lines? And then you can have a vocal arranger who's specifically focused on what the ensemble is doing. So you have a melody, but who's singing when? Should it be in a different key? How should it grow? If the ensemble's singing, what are they singing? The details of that. You can also have a dance arranger who's working with your choreographer to say, we have a melody and then we have a desire for dance. What are the dancers doing? They're going to spin here. Let's make it sound like spinning. They're going to do something more upbeat and then quiet. Let's make the music that we were given sound like that. So dance arranging is a huge job. And then the orchestrator colors it in. So the arranger tells you this is happening here and there, and the orchestrator says these are the colors I'm going to give you to make that happen. And the orchestrator can add their own voice as well to it, but they're working within a structure that the arranger has created. The orchestrator isn't going to add or remove bars. An arranger might do that, a composer might do that. And then I like to say the music director puts it on a frame and hangs it on the wall. You see the work that's there and you decide what it is and how it needs to be seen and heard. The music assistant I have not forgotten about supervisor. The music assistant these days is the person who enters things into notation software and also has done a bunch of other jobs. And part of what's interesting about music now is that musical theater is not a genre of music, it's a form of storytelling. So the way that stories are being told is changing as musical forms are changing, as technology is changing. So that has become a job that has really become essential to the rehearsal process because we've all learned to rely on it as the needs of the music department have grown, as music departments themselves have grown. Music supervisors, and please anyone correct me if you understand this differently, but I think some of the interesting part of this title comes from a weird quirk of how we tend to call these positions and the union, because a conductor of a show is the union name of the person who's playing a show, and we tend to identify that as the music director, but technically that's not the job. So how do you get credited for having the vision of a show if you are not actively performing the show? And music supervisor has sort of become this person who's overseeing all this other stuff that's gotten added to the show, the diplomacy, all this other stuff, working on TV appearances and Tonys, arranging and orchestrating as well, but not necessarily performing. So I think that music supervisor is a relatively new term to the field, and it tends to be the topmost position, but not every show has one because not every show needs one. And there's always someone doing the jobs, but the specifics of the jobs and how they get divided depend on the team.
When you have a music assistant like Conor, I also like to often give them other titles, like I was saying in the chat, secret weapon, because as Andrea mentioned, the way that the scene has gone now is that for commercial theater, the music assistant is so incredibly important, especially for new musicals that are from scratch or adaptations. So just to commend anyone who's doing that. And it is my wish, and I know Andrea agrees, that it could be a career position. Unfortunately, the way that it's structured right now in the union is not such that it is, I would say, sustainable or feels like growth is possible, but it is a highly specialized position that I feel deserves, especially again in new musicals from scratch. It deserves a lot of appreciation and pay.
Yeah, I mean, a music assistant, it was the first thing I did when I got to town, and it was really just you are the go-between for whatever the music team needs. That's a lot of inputting into notation software, as Andrea said. It's a lot of printing. It's a lot of communicating if there's been a change to each actor that it's relevant to and making sure that they get the pages that they need to have, making sure that at a certain point you become very familiar with the show. So you can look at the score and see if someone made an edit somewhere, something has gone missing that needs to be back in the score, or this is unclear. You're sort of a proofreader. In some cases, depending on what union contract you're under, you may also just be an accompanist at times. It is a lot of hats to wear. You really get to feel everything that's happening with the new work. It's a great way to understand how music teams work if you are new to the scene.
And I will say I've spent the past year working on a bit of a campaign to make this position more reasonable, because part of what has happened, I did this for a number of years, Conor, I bet you can relate to this as well. It's become too many things. So right now, when you talk to people who do music assistant work, they do everything, and they're doing things that should be union jobs that are other people's jobs. And there's a lot of confusion about the jobs because, as I think we'll discover today, everybody overlaps. So separating, it's very difficult to separate specific tasks in a creative process where the collaboration is essential to what you're doing.
The other thing I wanted to touch on from Holly's question is, when do all of these people come on to a process? And the answer really is, it depends. I say I'm a music supervisor because I'm a very bad pianist, so I could never be the person running rehearsals playing piano all of the time. But I do supervise shows, and a lot of that becomes now with the way commercial theater is running, especially for new work. When you are pitching a show, you want to give as much of the essence of it as you can when you are trying to get someone excited about it. So me as an orchestrator used to be, that was one of the very last things. You waited until you had a lot of development, the show was very set, so that way it was safe to pay someone the money to orchestrate it. Now with demo culture and people wanting to get excited, I'm getting brought on before music directors at times to do full, film arrangements for a show, whatever it is, so that way people can give something exciting to whoever they're trying to sell the show to. So it has become more nebulous than it used to be.
A lot of our writers have, let's say that they have finished their draft, they've done a reading, they've got a piano vocal score, which I know that Rebecca will talk about in a little bit, about those needs and how we do all of that. But they've got a piano vocal, or maybe they just have some tracks. They don't have the piano vocal yet, but they've done a reading and they're ready to do whatever is next. But all that is there, all of the team is made of currently is the creative team. So that might be one person who does book, lyrics, music, or it might be, 1 to 3 people. So when they start that next level, and Conor, I appreciate you talking about demos, because that's very relevant to where all of our audience is right now, is they feel like they're ready to submit to things, to submit to contests, or to, get a little more publicized reading, or some are submitting to producers. So at what point and who is probably the first person in that music department to snag and to say, okay, we need to get one of these? Is it best to, for a writer to go ahead and think through vocal arrangements first and develop kind of if they're a composer, should they write their own vocal arrangements just for an idea? Should they tinker with some orchestrations early on if they're not an orchestrator? So I know that, people have varied levels of talent and ability there. So once they've kind of done their thing, what's the appropriate person to bring on, just in your opinion and in your experience? How would that order go?
I would say that the first, or the thing that would affect that answer the most, is the budget that's involved. It's just the way that the things are going right now, that demos, I would say maybe even 5 years ago, if it was a piano with a great vocal produced demo, it's just fine. But most demos at this point, at least at upper level, is like pretty much orchestrated or digitally orchestrated, which again is something that Conor is amazing at doing. Um, so that, and that can be really costly. Like to do a 7-track demo with digital orchestrations and say like 6 singers and do it well could be like 20 grand. So it's just something to think about, where if you want to self-produce it at home, it may sound actually very close to that, but it all depends on what you kind of, what elements you're looking to include. And you can have a music director, but if you're a pianist, you really don't need that for the demo stage. You can do it yourself, especially if you're comfortable teaching vocals. That's just my recent experience with like adaptations and the demos and how they've been created.
I think a lot of it too comes into fill in the gaps where you feel like you cannot do. I know a lot of composers that are incredible vocal arrangers, and so they would not necessarily need to outsource that to another person. I work with a lot of composers that are fabulous pianists, and they can come up with amazing PVs of piano parts that can be played beautifully. And so then they would bring on, if I was a writer with being a bad pianist, I would probably look for a music director first as someone who can really help me fill this out, who can then help to teach and facilitate working with actors. If you feel like you have that pretty down pat and you want to go something in a demo phase, then it looks better to go to an arranger or an orchestrator, especially if you are writing, a show that is meant to be, let's say, symphonic in nature, and you are mostly a pop rock writer. Bringing on an arranger who can really help you deal with the genre you're trying to capture can be helpful. So I think a lot of it is filling in where your own weaknesses are.
Yeah, that's what I was going to reiterate as well. I think the next person that you bring along your journey, it's directly correlated to what you're comfortable doing and where your strengths and weaknesses lie. And then I also think on the orchestration side of things, when it comes to demos, I think it also depends on the style of music, like Conor said, the genre that you're going for. If you're trying to do something that's very hip hop or Hamilton-esque and a lot of beats, and you're going to want to be able to show that you're not going to be able to recreate that with just a piano vocal score with just piano and vocals. But if your show is based on the storytelling and the vocals, or maybe you're writing an acapella musical, you're not going to need that orchestrator arranger probably until later in the stage.
I haven't done much of making early demos of shows because the composers I have been working with make their own, and one plays many instruments and makes his own demos, and the other sings all the parts and just plays piano, and that's the best way for her to represent what's going on. I would say if you're reaching out to somebody, it makes sense to reach out to them knowing what the project is, not just this show, but what is this phase of development? Because it may be the person you need to make the best demos ends up not being someone who goes forward with the show if it goes into production. And that's a great way to meet somebody. But also, it might be that what you need is someone who's really good at making good demos. And the orchestration that you want for those demos is something that represents your ideas at the phase they are as well as possible. And you can dream big, but I think the fear, especially if you're writing a new show, is I don't know what it's going to be, and that's okay. Represent the ideas as they are now in the best way that you can for that. And whoever you bring on, you should say, if I want to make demos of this, here are the things I need. I need someone to teach the actors. I need someone to orchestrate, whatever it is. That'll help you find the right person.
So let's talk about the projects that you are attracted to, that you've been involved in. What's that process look like when you first get on a project? How do you find projects, and what attracts you to it?
I would say that knowing who's involved is a big part of it for me. You are creating a sustainable environment as a music director, meaning, we're spending 8 days a week with, cast and band and management. And at this point, it feels like, you want to you want to know what you're walking into. And also, if you kind of have people that you've always loved working with, that's amazing and often works well. But also, it's so important to continue to kind of spread your branches, to use the tree metaphor from before. It's just, there's no way to become a better musician than to continue to be in other experiences and other physical locations, but also with other communities and learning more skills as you go. So that the people aspect of it is huge for me. And also, what is the piece saying? Not everything has a huge message. Moulin Rouge is doing very well right now. I wouldn't say it's messageless, but it's certainly quite different than a lot of other works that are happening on Broadway right now. But all this to say, if that's something that feels important to you, to continue to pursue that and find projects that feel important to you at the end of every evening.
Yeah, I also generally pick my work by the people. If someone says this artist whose work I'm interested in is working on something, if I'm available, I'm going to do it because I'm excited about the collaboration. And if it's someone new, I'll see from the work if something is interesting to me, something about the theme, something that makes me think this is someone whose vision I want to help realize and who I want to help grow and who I want to grow with. I have generally gotten jobs through someone asking me, but someone asks me because over the years I have spent a lot of time meeting people and sharing my interest in their work and doing good work with other people, and slowly the web grows. So if I get a random email from someone, it's not a random email, it's someone I know from this person, from that person, because I did a thing, because I had coffee with someone and told them I was interested in blah, blah, blah. So over the years, you build the network of people who you're excited about working with, and hopefully they feel the same.
Yeah, just want to majorly back that up. I think I haven't gotten a job based off my resume since my first year here. It's always just been referrals, word of mouth. Who do you know? Who is your network? What is the reputation that you've gained from the work that you've done and the relationships that you have? And so that's super important. And so similarly, when I am looking for what I'm going to be doing next, or if I'm meeting someone new, a lot of it for me is, do I feel like I'm the right person for this job? Do I feel like this is going to be a good relationship? I have been offered jobs that I have turned down, not because I didn't want to do it, but because I thought I was actually the wrong person to take that on. If someone brought me a huge big band jazz show, I would refer them to one of my friends who can do that stupendously, and that's not me. And I know that if I did do that and I sort of thought maybe I could figure this out as I went, it would probably sour the relationship because I would be stressed doing work that was not optimal for me to be doing. So it's a lot of, how are you going to be able to work with these people?
Yeah, for me, it's been very transitional. I mean, pre-COVID, when I was full-time in Dallas, Fort Worth, it was a matter of, can I fit this in my schedule? Yes or no. I mean, that was the first thing. And it really wasn't based on what the show was, what the pay was, who the people were. It just, can I make this work or not? I think we've all learned a lot in our time off. And for me, it was just about, what am I passionate about? And like I said at the top, I'm just passionate about new musical works. And I agree with Conor on being the right person, especially in new musical works. I think that it's so important for the writer or for the production team or for the producers to know what they need and know what they're looking for and describe that so that I can tell them if I'm that person or not. If somebody comes to me with a show that's going to require tons of arranging, tons of finale work, that's not me. I'm not going to either. I'm going to say, okay, you can have me plus this other person, or it's just not me. Right. And so, or if it's something that's going to be ultimately guitar based or a rock band on stage that doesn't have a keys part or doesn't have me playing at it, I'm not really interested in that either. I want to be a part of the final project. I want to perform with everyone as well. So I think that's what I've turned down a lot in Dallas Fort Worth was, shows that weren't going to ultimately have a keys part or were orchestrated differently. But I think that's finding me or finding those projects is, am I going to be the right fit and am I going to enjoy this? And when it comes down to the show and the subject matter, I want something that I can invite people to, that I'm going to be proud of and be like, I would love for you to come see my final work. And that doesn't always drive either as well.
So talk to our audience about relationships, because that's something that I think is super, super important. I love that you guys really spoke like it wasn't about necessarily what the show was about, but it was about, you're going to be spending all of your time with these people, and you want it to be worth it, and you want it to be a good experience. You want your day to be joyful, and there's always going to be issues and problems. I mean, we know that, but you want to be doing it with people that you enjoy, that you don't, when they call you, you're not like, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk to that person. You know, you want to get a phone call from somebody on your team. So I really want to emphasize that. And I'd love for you guys, if you have any extra things to say about the importance of building relationships in this business, in the business of theater, and in, you know, you guys are in the business of Broadway, but in any theater setting, in that collaborative nature, speak to our audience about how important it is to build that network and to build those relationships.
I think for me, when it comes down to deciding if it's people I want to work with or not, being musical director by nature is sometimes an unsung hero role. It's under the director, it's under the producers. And so I want to be somewhere that I feel like my contribution to the project is recognized and respected. And that comes from, you know, all of my relationships, all of my writers and directors now. Most of them I knew when they were actors, right? And did they respect the role of a musical director? Were they flexible in rehearsals? And so I think that that's where I land, is like the respect of the role and what we bring to the table. And sometimes it's unsung. I think, you know, one of the hot topics in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is how many times reviews will happen and there will not be a single mention of the music director or the onstage band or any of that. And it's called a musical, and you had a musical director, and you need to recognize them. So I am drawn to directors and production teams and producers and theaters who give us the respect that we deserve for making the show happen.
I have a very strong opinion that I think auteurism is useless, and that especially in theater, no show happens because of one single person. Like I think the reason why theater people love Lin-Manuel Miranda so much is not only because he's a brilliant artist, but because he really gives kudos to all of the people that make his shows happen, and emphasizes the ways that Alex Lacamoire, his music director, and all the people who work on his shows make them happen. And so my biggest red flag, if I meet a composer that I've never worked with before, is if they feel very controlling of their product and very unable to bend. That not only is not great for probably what our relationship would be, but what their relationship to the director is going to be, to review criticism, to any of it. That is probably the biggest thing that I look at and say, this is probably not good. And that even if the show content is wonderful, in terms of the changes that are necessary every time, if they are pulling teeth, that's not fun for anyone. And I would really rather not. I would rather work with someone that understands that we are all here to make this as great as we can, and everyone has a valid opinion about how we can make it better.
Yeah, I love talking to people about projects I've worked on where there are things that I have contributed that I am so proud of, some of which you might notice, some of which you might not. And I'll talk about how hard I worked and all of the effort I put into it, and then say everybody else in the production worked just as much, if not more. Everyone. It's just big. Like if you look at any sizable contribution that anyone makes to any show, also a bunch of other people have done just as much. They're huge. It's just an enormous project. The relationships are everything, and like everyone is really talking about something very important, which is just being respected and valued. I think there's two other things I want to touch on. One is what Conor was saying about being flexible and being open to new ideas, because any musical is huge, and don't bring someone on if you're not interested in what they have to bring, because why are they there? Everybody has something to offer, and you need everyone to be aligned around the core thing, which is the story. And if your set designer isn't speaking to your music director, isn't speaking to your book writer about what's going on in a transition, then the story is not being told. Everyone has to be aligned, and you can see in a show whether everybody was aligned or not. And the other thing I will mention, if people at this phase or with a new show are looking for collaborators, it's really hard to figure out your relationship with someone without having something to work on. Creating a small project like making demos putting together a reading with people you don't know, having an opportunity to work is the best way to get to know people. And if someone reaches out to me with a show that I think is interesting, I might be interested, but I'm saying I don't know what I can do with it until we have an opportunity to connect in some way. So if you're looking to get to know other collaborators, create a project, give yourself a deadline. Say, I'm going to do a reading of it next month. Get some people in a room. Don't make it a big deal, but create something to do.
When you see a new writer come in and they present to you their score, what are some red flags that you see?
The red flag number one is just, lack of some sort of notation piano vocal score. If the intention is to get a performance of your show, a reading, however unstaged to stage, I can't read your mind, and my actors and performers and musicians can't read your mind either. So there has to be something on paper, something black and white dots on paper, or an PDF, because that's step one. And so I think when I don't have that, you're leaving a lot up to us, right? And so that gets back to, okay, well, before you want that, are you wanting me to arrange your show? If you're wanting to arrange your show, that's what's going to happen if I just get chord chart, right? And then it might not sound exactly like you want it in your head. So that's the biggest red flag, is what the level of preparation is. I think also just another red flag would be shows that haven't gone through, if finale is not your strong point, and you haven't kind of gotten somebody to help you consolidate, pages where there's 12 vocal staffs and the piano at the bottom, and so then we only get like 3 measures a page. That would be a notation red flag on the making the show happen.
Yeah, I think anything is workable as long as you are clear on what you know and what you don't know, and what you need to get to the point we're getting to, and whether those needs go beyond the ability of one person, or how much you have to pay one person to do them, and to be clear on what that is. So if someone says, here are some tracks I want to do a reading, and they don't understand that someone has to create scores and they think I'm going to do all of it, that's a different job. And do I want to is a different question. But understanding that and knowing that there is going to be a cost to that if you're asking somebody else to do it, because it's work. And it's okay not to know everything, but I tend to be the one in the room to say, okay, what's going to happen at a reading is that an actor is going to come in and I have to teach them what to do from this moment to that moment to that moment. We have to decide that. And I don't want, as the music director of a reading, to decide that first, because you are the writer and I work for you. I'm here to realize your vision. And once I have some sense of what you're doing, I'm happy to get in there and collaborate. But I want to start by realizing your vision, not writing something from scratch because it is your show. So to have a sense of clarity on what you think your vision is and how far it extends and when you really want someone else to enter in, that's what I'm looking for. And just to know that if you can't provide some written thing, I think that's a cost somehow that needs to be incorporated.
Yeah, I think just to second that, absolutely. It's just an understanding of what someone will need to do, and that every step of if you are not providing something like a score or, like accompaniment tracks, if you want your reading to have a band and you're not going to provide it, and you have tracks and the person that you're working with does not know how to set those up, music directors are not magicians who know all things. Some of them may, but not every one of them does. And they certainly should not be asked to do them if it is not additional compensation for the additional amount of work that they are putting into. So just understanding what you're asking and what that means for the person that you're asking it to.
One thing that I'd like to get you guys to address is script and score integration. So how important is that? I know that was an absolute nightmare at a workshop that we did for our show this summer, because we did not have a music assistant. So we were making those changes in finale and then bringing in all the script into the text boxes in finale on my little laptop in the middle of the night, 100 pages every day. I mean, it was absolute, it was horrible. And I was like, what, who does this? Because I don't think it should be me. What job is that? So I'm so glad to know that that is the music assistant. I will ask for that next time. But talk about that process. And is it important to you as a music director to have, like, do you want the entire script absolutely into the score? So if, now obviously not what happens between songs, that's not necessary, but all of the dialogue for a show that happens within a song, do you want it 100% in the score?
Yes.
I have a very specific example that actually happened to me this week. A local music director in Dallas sent me a new script, a new show that she's actually performing in this Christmas. And she said, hey, I need some rehearsal tracks. And she sent it to me, and it is just pages full of vamps. And instead of the actual dialogue of what that person is going to be saying, it just says character A dialogue. And then the next page you turn, it just says character B dialogue. And I said, I can make you rehearsal tracks, but I'm just going to be literally guessing. Is this a 3 vamp? Is it a 16 vamp? I need to know what the actor's supposed to be saying between here and there. Or if it's a dance break. Now, specifically for the readings that I do, that's what I make a living out of. And it's a non-memorized reading, and it's not staged. Having the score, the full show score and script integrated makes our jobs easier, whether it's on iPad or being printed out, right? That they are not having to flip back every time they've got to go sing a song, right? So to me, that is specific to what I'm doing, which is non-memorized readings, semi-stage productions where they are having the script and the score in their hand. Past that, when we get to a point where the script is memorized, it's still so important for the show to have, every single line of dialogue notated. If it's underscored, if there's music, if it's scene change music. The most recent score that I saw that was just perfect on this was the Come From Away piano conductor score. Is just pristine, and I wish all of my scores looked like that, because every single dialogue, and it shows where to go out on the vamp of everything. And so to me, that is like a perfect example of what I'm looking for an integrated script and score.
And just so no one thinks that this is trivial, I cannot tell you the number of 29-hour readings that I did as a music assistant, where basically the only thing I did for every hour of that was just inputting dialogue. The music director was doing all of the notation changes about what the piano was doing, which I would maybe also do. But if you're in that situation where you are super developmental, things are changing all the time, that is one person's full week of time. It can really make the difference between something being so fully realized, because there are times when we've had, the 2 binders here, but you will run into mistakes because someone is having to flip 2 pages and run around. Is it doable? Yes, but it's not optimal, especially if you get into a Come From Away-esque thing. If you're writing a super integrated thing with lots of ins and outs of dialogue, you really have no other choice. You absolutely have to do that and have someone really checking that full time.
You have to think about the people who are performing and what their life is moment to moment. You're going to have some actors who are going to learn the music, and then they're not going to want to look at the score because they just want a quick reference. So they're going to be looking at the script. And then you're going to have some people like the music director who's playing piano, who needs to know when the piano begins. And then if they're playing and there's dialogue happening, especially if you're developing, what's going on? When do you go on? I have to know. So I need to see it. And then if there's a big long scene, I don't need it all. But if it is in the middle of a big number, I generally do see them, because also putting in a script page that's not formatted for it, like I'm experiencing the full show. So I need to experience the full show. So it's important to create materials that are functional for the people who are performing, because that's actually all that matters. And I think that that's a trap that sometimes we as writers can fall into, is wanting to make it look pretty because you're proud of the work. But what you actually need is a practical tool for the people who are doing the work, which is performing.
Exactly. I liked how you talked about the wanting to read it off the script versus the score. We just did a reading last weekend for one of the MusicalWriters Academy shows, and the finale was the most wordy song in the whole show. And once my actors learned it, they preferred to read that off of the script than be flipping through the music, because it was, 4 measures a page had how many words were in it. So I think that having that flexibility of, okay, this is something that we're going to switch back to the script, but it would have been impossible to throw together a show as quickly as we did if they were having to go back and forth to go find the lines that happened in the underscoring.
And just one more thing to really emphasize, if you are doing book or lyrics, or if you are close with the person who's doing book and lyrics, no change is too small to mention to the music director. I cannot tell you the number of times we've been in the middle of playing something and they said the new cue line that they did not tell the music director, and they're sitting there going, I haven't heard my line yet. I'm waiting to go on.
Just, you have to do everything. You're like, it happens every show. There's one day where I'm like, oh, I don't need all this. And then one thing happens that I didn't get. And I was like, well, that idea goes out the window.
Yeah, and that goes for actors too. I always tell them, I literally do not care what you say on stage, but the last 3 words of your line needs to match up with what my cue line is, or I'm going to stay in the vamp until you say those words. Otherwise, I don't know. You could skip 4 sentences, but those last 3 words need to be what's on my music.
I pulled up a score in case we wanted to look someone asked to see an example. Do you want to see one? Hold on.
Great.
I just totally changed my preview. What's happening? Hold on. I broke preview. Ah! It's coming. Stand by. That's never happened before. Okay, here we go. So here's a score that begins with some dialogue. You'll also notice the revision date and what the revision was. Everybody has their own way of formatting this. I like to see on every page when the revision was made and what changed, so that I know, like, oh, I should look at measures 10 through 12, and then you can even mark it there. But anyway, so here we go. The music ends. Here's some music. Here's where the line lands. It lands about here. And then this is where the scene is happening. And then this scene needs to get cut here. So I've spaced out the dialogue so that it happens about where in the music it happens. And then I know that the music needs to cut out about this place. Wherever it cuts out, these lines go on. Well done, Max. And then I do this. So I, as the music director, and I'm standing there, I will devote, cut out. I'm immediately jumping here. Well done, Max. Boom, boom, boom. And then we go on. And then we've got some here at the end. And here's my cue go on written at the end of this section, going into this last bit. After this chord, we have one more line. So not only does it matter that it's all written there, it's written in the right place. So my eye is tracking it vertically with where it happens in the music, so that I can see that go on here, tells me to go on to this next bar. And actually, I look at this one now, I would move it over a little bit because I think it should be over this bar because it's happening in this fermata. I have a lot of opinions about where exactly you line up the lines also.
And it totally depends. Your music director can have different things. The music director I work with, Ron Melrose, who did Jersey Boys and A Bronx Tale, among other things, he will put, here's this word, that's 3, 4 for your intro. If you hit this word, that's 4 to move on to this. Like, people can get really granular about it, which is, it's sort of up to your MD and how they want to conduct it.
That is awesome information, guys. Let me just tell you, all of you out there, this is absolutely on point. And obviously they know what they're talking about, but as a writer who has really recently dealt with this, it is a pain in the rear, let me tell you, to do that as a writer, but it is so worth it. It is absolutely necessary. And the director and the music director, it makes their life so much easier. And just know that when you do get into those rehearsals, that stuff's going to change. So you may have I love that, when you're talking about the vamp and the underscore, as a writer, so my husband is our composer, and he will indicate the underscore. But, one thing that I have been so impressed with the music directors that we've had is they have this ability. And somebody asked a question of this in the chat that talked about, let me see what this was about, the a unifying musical genre, like a musical style of the show. So your music director is so good at being able to learn the show. And then the underscore, like our music director made up a bunch of underscore, but it was right. It wasn't what we had written as a composer, but when we needed to add things or vamp, or we added a dance sequence, it wasn't something that the composer had to go home or go back to the room and write that night. The music director was able to take the bones of the show and create some of that. So, talk about that. Do you prefer to kind of make that up on your own and write that, or do you go back to a composer, or I guess you might go to an arranger, orchestrator, like when you're in a rehearsal room in a development setting, in a workshop or something like that, where you're pulling scenes, you're breaking songs, you're adding some gaps, maybe some new dialogue came in and you've got to interrupt a song. Who handles the music portion of that?
I think it depends on what your final product is you're working on. And all of the new musicals that I'm working on, a lot of times we're in a part of development where underscoring either doesn't exist at all, or maybe in very small sections, or tons of underscoring exists for something that's not going to necessarily work in my reading. If we're not being able to actually act out the fight scene or the death scene, I'm going to have to make some edits, because I'm not going to have my actors just stand there at their stands while I'm playing this whole big orchestration. So I think as long as there's like an intention in our last show that we had, there was some notation of like, this is happening in slow motion and then this is back in time. And there was some flexibility there to use the music that was written and fit it to our staging. So I think it just really depends on what the final product is going to be. And it really depends on is this fully staged where we're trying to fill for scene changes and costume changes and choreography and fight choreography, or are we imagining those things and we're just setting the scene with the dialogue that exists?
There's also like a level of triage that you do depending on where you are. Like if you are in separate rooms, certainly, but if you're just sort of in the middle of something, it's like, we need 2 more bars. We would just stick a repeat around these 2 bars and then telegraph later to composer, arranger, whomever, we need 2 more bars here. Can you eventually do? And we would sort of do that in the meantime until there is something to do. The thing to note that for music directors, for book writers, choreographers, directors, actors, once you put in a placeholder like that, the longer it is there, the more people get used to it and the less likely you are to be able to change it. So once you do that, I would change it as soon as possible.
Very wise. I think the key thing to say is that work is arranging. That doesn't mean an arranger does it. The person who does it is arranging. And if there is a lot of that work and someone who is not the composer is doing it, for example, if I'm doing it on a show, then they should get credited for arranging at a certain point. I like to arrange on shows I work on, so I want to be that person and I want to be credited for it. I've done a show where there's so little of it because the composer is doing so much that I'll throw in ideas, but I'm not asking for any credit because like there's maybe 2 or 3 bars that are in any significant way different from what the composer said. But if the composer is doing it, sure. If a completely different person on the team is doing it, then they are arranging and then they're starting to deserve credit. But absolutely what Conor said about making placeholders, but watch out. And there are a lot of shows. It's really fun to talk to people when you see those scores that you get from MTI of an existing show to be like, oh, that was just there because some person threw in a thing one day. And then we froze the show and now that's it for the rest of time.
Okay, Kennedy, I'm going to kind of turn things over to you and let you pull any questions from the chat that we've had. Do you have any burning questions going on over there?
Yes, I have quite the variety. So we can start with basically your non-traditional musicals, where the musical language isn't necessarily consistent all the way through. Are you seeing where the orchestrators, arrangers, ensemble choices successfully pulled the eclecticism together by unifying the way that the score is delivered instrumentally to tie everything together? If it wasn't a very genre-specific musical. if you understand what I'm saying. So are you seeing that well done? Are you a part of that as the music director, or maybe as an arranger, or another hat that you wear?
A lot of people can work in many genres. I think a lot of it comes down to, for me, a project that I just took on recently was about a group of immigrants coming into Ellis Island. So we had a lot of different kinds of musical languages playing in there. And so part of it was, what are we getting from the composer, and how does that sort of look? Does it feel authentic to these worlds that we're living in? Or do we need to sort of take it one degree further in an arrangement sense to get the structure of the song to feel correct? And then from there, as an orchestrator, my job was to make sure that we were using the right kinds of sounds to give you the feeling that you were meant to. And that can also work even if the song is not entirely accurate to what the real form of it is, if you're playing a jig in an Irish show. But if you have a fiddle playing it, if you have a penny whistle, if you have these sorts of things, it can get your ear into most of the place. And for 98% of people, that will be more than enough to be like, oh, okay, yes, I know where we are. We're right here. And certainly when there have been styles that I have not understood, or I've been in a situation where I'm saying, this is not something that I am comfortable with, either because of my skill or because I don't think I have the background to speak to this, there is a lot of bringing in another collaborator in the form of an orchestrator or whomever to then supplement what you're doing.
It's a really nuanced question because there isn't a right answer. It's art. Like, if you make it work, then it works. So I would never venture to say I know the solution. But I think your piece is what it is. And if you are pulling music from different genres and that's the piece, then that's what the piece is. And if you are pulling from different genres and then need to come together and have some sort of unifying thing, what is the unifying thing? The instruments that are playing, like, there's so many ways to go about it. Like, for any people who like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, there's a lot of really interesting stuff to read about the different animation styles that make that movie and how they're all, like, that's the point. That's an essential part of the movie. And there are probably other movies where if they had different animation styles, you'd be like, what's going on? But that's fundamental to that story. I feel like the musical version of that recently was Be SpongeBob, which was a lot of different writers that had a unifying orchestrator and arranger who sort of brought it all together to whatever degree of success you feel you want to assign that piece. Because again, it's art. Did you like it? Did you not? That's really all that matters.
My producer hat answer for this is that when you are mixing genres, mixing styles of music, you've got to look at the orchestration aspect of that. And I think that, we talked about the demo culture a little bit. It's really easy when we're creating things and creating demos to go, okay, well, this one's going to have a big band sound, and this one's got a rock band sound, and this one's got this, ethnic choice of music on this one. And then you have to realize that the reality of being able to hire all of those musicians to make that happen at any level, really, community all the way up to Broadway, is not going to be feasible if it comes down to needing 47 people to make your mix of genres work. So you do have to realize that at the end of the day, there does have to be some unifying aspect of the orchestration, or you're going to be relying a lot on keyboard programming, which is amazing now. And we can do so many great things with it that do sound really realistic and healthy. But then that's a whole nother philosophical situation of, are we taking away jobs from actual humans? But that is a trap that I have seen with folks who have created these amazing demos, and all of them sound wonderful, but then actual reality of making that physically happen with real humans in a real theater is either going to rely heavily on keyboard programming, or it's going to probably have to cut away some of your dreamed orchestrations. That's the producer hat with a little bit of music director hat in there.
I would love if Meg was still here, because her show that's going up with the public right now has some traditional Middle Eastern instruments in it. And there is also, if you put on your orchestrator hat, or you're ever wearing this kind of thing, the more things that you have a single instrumentalist do, the harder it is to replace them. So if you have a long-running anything and you have a player, they are going to get sick. They are going to have a conflict. Mm-hmm. Something is going to happen, and someone else is going to have to play that chair. And if you have someone who plays the cello, the harmonica, the electric guitar, and then also a foot hi-hat, there's only so many people that can do that.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you sometimes catering to someone's individual skills is good, but if you get too granular on that, you really decrease your number of people that can come in and keep something going if you're doing a long run. Right. And in New York, we have, the luxury of a lot of people and a lot of different kinds of instrumentalists. So something like that can happen at the public where this person is playing, very traditional violin playing and then traditional Middle Eastern instruments. But if you're doing that show somewhere else in the country, you might not have those resources.
If I may, I have also done a show with a lot of traditional Middle Eastern instruments, and it's very hard. And that show was also hard because they were really on stage. So it was a whole complicated thing. But like, I've met a lot of oud players. There are only so many, and there are only so many who want to do a theater job. Yeah. Like if you're doing an off-Broadway show, that's a huge commitment for a good player who is used to having gigs and is used to being able to do one thing a night and one thing a different night. And I want them to do the same thing multiple nights a week for months on end and not be able to get that much time off for how much money? Like, yeah. It's also a job and they have to want to do it. So creatively, you have to make it worth their while. And I think that the band's visit will not get produced regionally very much because you cannot do it without an oud player, and you cannot do it without a darbuka player, and you cannot do it with at least one person who is both an actor and a musician of either violin or oud are the two ways we've done the show before. And there are a couple ways to switch it around, but it makes it hard.
I mean, I can guarantee if you've got instruments like she just said that are going to require the average musical director or director to Google what they are before they can even agree to the project. The lifespan past, large production budgets are going to make it difficult. And you have to, look into the future for some of those things.
And if that is your show, then that is your show.
Exactly.
Yeah, just use those resources widely. Don't spread them too far. If you're writing an Irish national show and you want a penny whistle player, go get a penny whistle player. It's going to be amazing. And write that show. It will be awesome. Just understand that any choice like that has ramifications for how difficult it will be to do.
And understand that when it does get produced by community or regional theater and they can't find a penny whistle player, the choice will be to have no penny whistle, or they might be played on a traditional flute. And you have to be okay with that substitution at that level of production as well. Or you have to write it in your script, please do not produce this without a penny whistle player, and then your show will not get produced.
Could you discuss the role of a sound designer in relation to a music director?
In my experience in Dallas-Fort Worth, a lot of times sound designer gets labeled, and just like music director gets labeled with a whole bunch of stuff. And so you can have a sound designer in DFW who is responsible with what I would consider sound tech. So everything from getting the mics on the actors and running sound and running actors and mixing the orchestration and vocals and all of that. Plus, they might also be responsible for sound effects and pre-show music and post-show music and all of the aspects of anything that's coming through the technology or the speakers. And I think that just like music director in community regional theater could be responsible for 11 jobs, that would be 11 people on Broadway. Same with community regional theater for sound director, is it can be one person who's getting responsible for what would be 11 jobs on Broadway. So community regional sound designer is definitely somebody that you need to have conversations with, especially when it comes down to what the technology is available, what the resources are available, and knowing, okay, this person is, going to have to be mic'd or double mic'd, or we're going to be dealing with sound effects. Who's responsible for the sound effects? Are they coming from the board? Are they coming from the keyboard programming? Who's cueing them? Is that a stage manager direction? Is it off of the musical director? So very much need to be in communication with that person. But I think it's another umbrella term that, again, the smaller and less professional theaters that you get is one person doing a lot of jobs, but you do definitely need to be in communication with the music director.
I think it is more and more in the way that Broadway is going at the moment and where current theater is. Sound design has become even more integral to the way things sound, because as some shows push more into a pop genre that is a very produced, specific, mixed sound. So if you went and saw something like Dear Evan Hansen, not only is the orchestration immaculate, but the sound design, so you're hearing the right thing at every moment, is also immaculate. And that really takes time. And so if you are in a phase of production as a composer where you can push for something, I would always say that you should push for as much time with the sound designer and the band together as you can get, because those things are not going to get ironed out in tech. They're not going to get ironed out in performances. The sound team has too many other things to think of. It really comes down to a good seating, which is where the orchestra for the first time sits in their spots that they will be in for the show. We do all the mic checks. You can spend a lot of time doing that. For sound to hopefully be there for orchestra rehearsals or have orchestra rehearsals in the theater under the circumstances they will be in, the more time that you can get production to allocate to sound and orchestra together, the more cohesive of a sound you're going to get, the more granular and specific you can get with every musical moment.
Yeah, I will also say it is my desire as a music director to give a sound designer an acoustically balanced performance from both the band and the actors and say, make it sound like this. I don't want an album. That's not why I'm in the theater business. So I'm listening to actor rehearsals. I'm listening to orchestra rehearsals to be able to tell the sound designer, just make it this and make sure it gets around. I don't want them saying, bring out this horn line here. That's an orchestration question. That's a performance question. And I think not everybody feels that way, but from a practical theater perspective, it's not an album. They can't do that. The mixer has so much to do just bringing up the actors' mics up and down. So they're there to help support the performances that people are doing.
Similar to the music assistant thing, where like, this is a person, they will have an opinion. You can get wildly different products based on who you did. I did a production of American Idiot where the director stepped away for a little bit in tech, and the sound designer said, wouldn't it be great if we had a production where you could really hear every word of this? And so brought the band down. And when the director came back, he said, this is a rock concert. The band needs to be up. And so you, depending on who it is, you could absolutely get something. Sound designers are not the same across the board. They're not all going to give you the same thing. They are also creative people that are going to have things that they're going to put forward into the product. So you want to be able to collaborate with them, interface with them, communicate what you want out of it, whether it's a very strictly acoustic sound, whether it's much more produced and mixed. Those are all conversations that you have with a designer.
And what you just said is the key difference between the musical theater sound and a music-focused sound.
Well, and I think that's why the sound design has gotten to be such a big job as well. And where there's so many varying opinions is because we are producing shows that would not be physically impossible, or that would be physically possible without them, right? So American Idiot's a perfect example. I did a production of Lizzie Borden, the musical, that's full on stage rock band. And you have to have somebody who understands that the guitar part is just as important to the composer as the lyrics are. And so when we're doing things that are more electronic, more rock band focused, you just have to. And then I think when we've got the multimedia aspect, a lot of the scripts that I'm looking at now, I've got writers who are dreaming big with, well, this will be pre-taped and this will be videoed and this will be on a projection screen. And you've got to organize all of that when you've got merging off-stage recorded things. And I think also just having off-stage singers and on-stage singers and all of that. It's a huge thing. And for me, it results in a lot of spreadsheets and what needs to be on and what needs to be off at the same time. So
how can we take our grand ideas and a tiny budget and make more with less? The question specifically was, the size of a standard Broadway orchestra is getting smaller. How can you make a 7-piece orchestra as a full-piece orchestra? But you can also take that and run with it as we're closing out.
Make it a 7-piece orchestra. Write what you have. Do not write a piece that is aspiring to be something else. I saw a production of Eurydice in college in a big theater. Eurydice is a great play by Sarah Ruhl, for anyone who doesn't know it. Big theater, huge, beautiful set. It was gorgeous. I then saw a production of it at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in the smallest theater I've ever been in. That was basically a classroom, and they had a little pulley and a curtain and like 3 props, and it was just as beautiful. Know what you're doing, the size of it, and do that, and let it be its full self. You don't need 70 pieces. And for some things you do, but that's a different thing. You probably don't at the beginning. But if you are, what I said at the beginning stands. Don't write a piece that's aspiring to be something else.
understand what your piece needs to get the most out of it. Something like Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet on Broadway was such a visual spectacle. Of course, there was a band. Of course, there was an orchestration. Of course, it sounded lovely. But that really was a feast for the eyes. And so they put a lot of money and energy into the visuals. And so if you are a songwriter, if you are someone who's very lyric focused and you write good piano, maybe start with no band and really focus on what is the story. Let's get the words. Let's get a good cast going. If you have a rock band energy, you might want to figure out how to write that for a 4-piece. Figure out what elements are really going to enhance your story and what elements may just be at this point extraneous. Like, can we do a reading of it and can we just have people wear plain clothes instead of going to a costume designer? We would always love costume designers to be employed and have lots of work, but just so that way you're finding the thing that is going to amplify what makes your show special.
I totally agree. I think the greatest pieces of musical theater that we have out there can be just as powerful with a single piano or a single guitar. And so if you are relying on a 40-piece orchestra, or if you're relying on a 4-keyboard programmed thing with a ton of sound effects, and your show isn't worth anything without it, then I think you need to go back to the drawing board. I think some of my favorite things that I've ever been a part of are readings and shows that have happened with just a piano or just a guitar, with no costumes, with no props, with no sets. And the story can stand on that. And then everything else is just glitter and magic, right, on top of it. So that's where I stand on orchestration, is that, I can tell from your piano vocal or from your guitar chord charts with just some rhythm notations, if this show is going to be something anybody wants to see, because I'm looking into the future. I'm looking to that if this is an amazing show, we're going to see it produced in so many different forms and fashions, from full Broadway production budgets to little private high schools that had, $5 to do it, to community theaters, to everything. And if it's worth its mustard, it'll still be meaningful and exciting at any of those price points.
I'm a vegetarian, but I describe a good piece of writing as a lean cut of meat. You don't need anything. It's just the meat. If you're putting a lot of sauce on it, if you're trying to cover it up, remember that's what you're going to be eating.
Yeah, it's like barbecue sauce. If you put barbecue sauce on anything, it tastes like barbecue sauce. So, I mean, yeah, you can put a 50-piece orchestra on top of it. It's going to sound like a 50-piece orchestra, but the story didn't change.
I think to speak also to Andrea's point from earlier about seeing something at the Fringe is, a great story can fit in many different kinds of venues, but you don't always think that the biggest version of the thing is the best version of the thing. There are a lot of shows, even that are being slated for Broadway, where I'm thinking, if you put that in a 2,000-seat theater, it's going to have expectations on it that it wouldn't have otherwise had if it was in an off-Broadway theater, in a small proscenium, in a bar restaurant with a stage. There are so many different kinds of venues and places that you can put up a show and formats you can do. So it may not be that going to the big equity theater in town is the move. It could be something entirely different, and that is cool.
Well, thank you so much, our panel, for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts with us tonight. If everybody can give them some round of applause from all over the world, wherever you might be.